Matthew Flinders was an innovative English navigator and cartographer who was one of the most eminent explorers of his day. He gained widespread recognition for his comprehensive examinations of the Australian coastline, during which he became the first person to sail around the entire continent and recognize it as a unified landmass, so establishing the use of the name Australia for the continent that was previously referred to as New Holland by the Europeans. At the age of 15 years old, he commenced his career in the Royal Navy and served under Captain William Bligh on a voyage to Tahiti. In 1801, he embarked on a more significant expedition with the objective of mapping the Australian coastline. He made significant geographical findings, but faced numerous challenges, including being shipwrecked and even imprisoned during the journey. In 1803, he was apprehended by the French on the island of Mauritius while sailing back to England, and held captive there for a period of over 6 years. Regardless of all of the turmoil, his contributions, particularly his significant publication, A Voyage to Terra Australis, released shortly before his death in 1814, has been of immense use in the exploration and cartography of Australia. Welcome to the channel, everyone, and welcome back to those who are returning. Well, if you enjoyed the video about James Cook, you're certainly going to enjoy this one too. The same flavor, different dish. It's Matthew Flinders this time. So it is the second great figure in the founding of my country. Now, as always, before we start, you're already supporting the channel by just enjoying it, and I certainly hope that you are. Now, if you want to do a little bit of a solid for me, then just click the like and subscribe button. That really helps, as we're always trying to grow the channel. And if you want to have a look at the links in the description, if you feel inclined to do so, then go ahead. But first, let's all get nice and comfortable. It's the life of Matthew Flinders today. Now, we begin the story in Donington, Lincolnshire, when on the 16th of March, 1774, Matthew Flinders was born. His father, who also shared his name, Matthew Flinders, was a surgeon, and his mother's name was Susanna. Now, he received his education at Cowley's Charity School in Donington, starting in 1780, and he later attended the Reverend John Shingler's Grammar School in Horbling, Lincolnshire, a bit of a larger town. Now, according to his own account that we have from his own writings, he was compelled to embark on a maritime journey, despite the objections of pretty much everyone that he knew. In fact, he was inspired to do so by reading the novel Robinson Crusoe, which is of course about the man who gets stranded on an island, which I don't know why that would inspire somebody to go and be a sailor. I thought that would rather prevent somebody, but, well, I suppose it's all in the eye of the beholder. Adventure is adventure. Now, in 1789, at the age of 15 years old, he went to the Royal Navy and signed up, putting his name on the dotted line for a life of adventure in that golden age of maritime exploration. Because what else would a 15-year-old boy do? Go and be a blacksmith? Go and work at one of the Oliver Twist-like little factories? I don't think so. So, with the support of Captain Thomas Pasley, Flinders began his service on the HMS Alert as a servant We all have to start somewhere. However, he was quickly moved on to HMS Scipio as an able seaman. In July of 1790, which was the following year, he was quickly promoted to midshipman on the new ship, the HMS Bellerophon. So certainly getting up the ranks quite quickly, especially for a 15-year-old. The apprentice doing quite well, it seems. Now, May of 1791, he enlisted in Captain William Bligh's mission aboard the HMS Providence, as he was advised to do so by Paisley. The purpose of the trip was to bring breadfruit from Tahiti to Jamaica. This was Bligh's second expedition to collect the said breadfruit, which came under the unfortunate journey of HMS Bounty. Video on that one soon enough. Well, the voyage navigated through the Cape of Good Hope and reached Adventure Bay on the eastern shore of Bruny Island, located off the southeastern coast of present-day Tasmania, in February of 1792. Now, Tasmania, by the way, is that little triangular island to the southeast of Australia. Well, the southeast of Australia in general, but the province of Victoria directly to the south of it. And it's really nice, by the way. Well, the officers and crew spent more than a week in the area, acquiring water and lumber, and they also engaged with the indigenous Aboriginal people who were there. This marked Flinders' initial encounter with any of the territory that currently constitutes the Commonwealth of Australia. Following the arrival of the expedition in Tahiti in April of 1792, and the successful acquisition of several breadfruit plants for transportation to Jamaica, they embarked on a westward journey. Bligh opted to bypass Adventure Bay, and instead sailed north of the Australian continent, navigating through the Torres Strait. At this location near Zagai Island, they engaged in naval conflict with armed indigenous individuals in a group of sailing canoes, leading to the fatalities of multiple islanders and one crew member. Still pretty brave for the guys in canoes to go after those boats. Perhaps they didn't know what they were up against. Well, in February of 1793, the expedition reached Jamaica, and finally had the chance to unload the breadfruit trees. Afterwards, they sailed back to England, with Flinders disembarking in London in August of 1793, marking the end of a more than 2-year-long journey at sea. Not bad for an early career. Well, the thing is with long sea voyages then, well, you're pretty lucky if you made it back. Of course, technology had gotten a lot better as the British and the Spanish and the French, the Portuguese were generally excelling at shipbuilding technologies, but still, it was mainly a diet sort of thing. Fortunately, James Cook solved a lot of the scurvy issues by bringing aboard lots of limes and sauerkraut and all the rest, but, well, some people it hadn't quite caught on yet. Now, back to Flinders, who returned to HMS Bellerophon in September of 1793, 1 month after he'd gotten back to London. So he was obviously very keen to get back on the waves, and once again he was serving under the leadership of Captain Paisley. In 1794, Flinders participated in the glorious 1st of June combat aboard this ship. This battle was the initial and most significant fleet engagement between the Kingdom of Great Britain and the First French Republic during the French Revolutionary Wars. Flinders documented the hard combat in a comprehensive notebook, detailing how Captain Pasley suffered the loss of his leg due to an 18-pound shot that penetrated the barricade on the quarter deck. Ouch! You imagine a cannonball just ripping your leg off. Not a good way to go. Of course, amputations back then were no anesthetic, just bite the dirty rag and hope for the best. Bring out the bone saw. Well, either way, both Pasley and Flinders did manage to escape, but Flinders made the choice to prioritize exploratory naval commissions above military naval ones. After all, that's slightly less dangerous. Well, driven by his yearning for adventure, Flinders joined the crew of the HMS Reliance as a midshipman in 1795. The ship was en route to New South Wales, which is one of the provinces in Australia just above Victoria, East Coast. That's where Sydney is, by the way, transporting Captain John Hunter, the newly appointed governor of the British territory. Now, during his journey, Flinders formed a friendship with one George Bass, the ship's physician, who was 3 years older than him and had been born in Aswarby, a mere 11 miles away from Donington. Small world. Well, September 1795, the HMS Reliance arrived at Port Jackson, where explorers George Bass and Matthew Flinders quickly organized an expedition. They embarked on this journey in a small open boat named Tom Thumb, accompanied by the young lad William Martin. Together they sailed to Botany Bay and explored up the Georges River. In March of 1796, Bass and Flinders, again with William Martin, set out on another expedition in a larger vessel called Tom Thumb II. They sailed south from Port Jackson, but were soon forced to land at Red Point, which is now called Port Kembla. Now, at Red Point, modern-day terms Port Kembla, they enlisted the help of 2 indigenous men who guided them to the entrance of Lake Illawarra. Here they dried their gunpowder and resupplied their water provisions with the assistance of a local indigenous community, who were reportedly quite happy to help. Now, as they returned to Sydney, they sought refuge at Watamolla, and also ventured into parts of Port Hacking, known to the local Dharawal people as Debun. Oh, and by the way, a lot of Australian town names are, well, they're taken from the local indigenous names. So when you have names like Watamolla, Wagga Wagga, Woolloomooloo, they're usually from the local tribal names for those places. Now, in 1798, Flinders, now promoted to lieutenant, congratulations to him, was assigned the command of his own sloop, and that sloop was called Norfolk. And he had a mission. This mission was to navigate past Fourneau's Islands and determine whether a strait separated Van Diemen's Land from the mainland. Van Diemen's Land was the old name for Tasmania, that landmass that is south of Australia. Now, Flinders and Bass had previously undertaken separate expeditions in the area, but neither had definitively proven the existence of a strait. The time had come. Flinders, along with Bass and several crew members, navigated the Norfolk around the uncharted northern and western shores of Van Diemen's Land, circumnavigating Cape Pillar, and then returning to Fourneau's Islands. Through this voyage, Flinders successfully completed the first full circumnavigation of modern-day Tasmania and confirmed the existence of a strait, which, to this very day, is named Bass Strait. Flinders had named that in honor of his close friend and companion, and that's really nice of him, I think. He could have named it Flinders Strait, but he didn't. In fact, the main street of my city, Melbourne, is called Flinders Street. It's probably best not to go there. Well, the largest island in the strait was named Flinders Island in his honor, by the way, so there is that. Now, during this expedition, Flinders and Bass also explored several kilometers of the River Derwent in a small boat, where they had their only recorded interaction with Aboriginal Tasmanians. In 1799, this following year, with Bass having returned to Britain, Flinders received orders to explore the coastline north of Port Jackson. He was once again assigned the sloop Norfolk and embarked on this expedition with his brother Samuel Flinders and an Aboriginal man from the Ku-ring-gai tribe named Bungaree, who would later gain fame as a navigator and intermediary between indigenous Australians and the European settlers. They set sail on the 8th of July, 1799, arriving at Moreton Bay 6 days later. Flinders landed at Woody Point and named a nearby area Red Cliff, due to the striking red cliffs, obviously, and the name persists to this day. It's still called Red Cliff. As Flinders continued his exploration of Moreton Bay, he discovered a narrow body of water that he named the Pumice Stone River, unaware that this channel actually separated Breby Island from the mainland. This waterway is now known as Pumice Stone Passage. Now, Flinders' encounters with the indigenous people of Moreton Bay were mostly peaceful. Key word is mostly. There was a notable incident on the 15th of July near the southern tip of Breby Island, where a spear was thrown, resulting in a local man being shot in retaliation. Flinders named the location of this confrontation Point Skirmish. While anchored in Pumice Stone Passage, Flinders, along with Bungaree and other crew members, undertook an overland journey, during which they climbed Mount Beerborum. They also attempted to traverse the steep cliffs of Mount Tibrogargan before deciding to turn back around on July 26th, retracing their steps to rejoin the Norfolk and continue their expedition. Departing from Moreton Bay, Flinders proceeded northward, conducting explorations as far as Harvey Bay, before retracing his route back south. They returned to Sydney on the 20th of August, 1799. Flinders then reunited with the ship Reliance and made his way back to Britain in the March of 1800. Now, while he was on this journey, the Antipodes Islands were uncovered and accurately mapped. It was on the way. May as well add it to the list. Flinders' work had attracted the notice of other scientists during the time as well, especially the influential Sir Joseph Banks, to whom Flinders devoted his observations on the coasts of Van Diemen's Land and Bass's Strait, etc. Banks utilized his sway over Earl Spencer to persuade the Admiralty of the significance of an expedition to survey the shoreland of New Holland. Consequently, in January of 1801, Flinders was appointed as the commander of HMS Investigator, a sloop weighing 334 tons, and was elevated to the rank of commander in the subsequent month. The investigator embarked on a voyage to New Holland on the 18th of July 1801. The trip included the botanist Robert Brown, the botanical artist Ferdinand Bauer, the landscape artist William Westall, the gardener Peter Good, a geology assistant John Allen, and John Crossley as the astronomer. Now, the Borden voyage did have a larger group of scientific gentlemen in comparison to this one, which indicates that the British tendency to be a little frugal in their scientific pursuits. After all, there's only so many scientists you want to put on a boat in 1801, going halfway across the world. In case something happens, well, you don't want to lose them, and it's very easy to lose them. Well, John Franklin, a future explorer who was related to Flinders, through marriage, by the way, on this time worked as a midshipman too, so it's good to have a little family along for the trip. Now, on the 6th of December 1801, Flinders aboard the ship Investigator arrived at and officially named Cape Lewin. He then began a detailed exploration of the southern coast of the Australian mainland. The crew anchored in King George Sound, staying for a month to explore the surrounding area. Initially, the local Aboriginal people expressed a desire for Flinders' crew to leave, but after a little bit of diplomacy, relations sought to improve, with one local even participating in musket drills with the ship's marines. They actually brought him on the boat and showed him how to do it. Well, that's interesting. That's a cultural exchange, I suppose. I don't know how interested the British were in learning the indigenous cultures, but, well, it is what it is, isn't it? Now, during this time, Flinders discovered a copper plate in nearby Oyster Harbour, left the previous year by Captain Christopher Dixon of the ship Elligood. But tragically, during a return trip to the ship from an exploration of the mainland, 8 of Flinders' crew members were lost when their sailing cutter collapsed. Remember what I said about it's easy to lose people on a ship in 1801? Well, case in point. Flinders named this area Point Lincoln, after his home county of Lincolnshire, and the neighbouring bay Memory Cove, in honour of the lost men. On the 21st of March 1802, the expedition reached a large island, where they observed numerous docile kangaroos. Flinders and his crew slaughtered 31 of them to replenish their meat supply, and named the island Kangaroo Island in recognition of this event. However, the seals on the island were less friendly, and one crew member received a nasty little bite. Now, just quickly, a little cultural note about kangaroos. You're probably thinking, oh my goodness, they shot the kangaroos and they ate the kangaroos. Quite right, they did. Kangaroos are great on the barbecue. I don't care what anyone says. Now, during my time in China, I mentioned to many people that Australians eat kangaroos, and they were quite shocked, because you see, in China, they view kangaroos as giant rats. In fact, the Chinese word for kangaroo is dai shuo, and that shuo is kind of like the way they have mouse or rat. It's one of the characters that are interchangeable, but you'll also see it in those different sort of marsupial animals when they spell them out in Chinese. So basically, They're quite shocked, because they think it's the same as eating rats. Now, I've never eaten a rat myself, at least not yet. I know that in Vietnam they have field rats that they use, so I'm not sure if I ever will, but I don't think that the taste is quite the same. Well, moving on from my love of kangaroo, perhaps you think I'm quite beastly now. I hope I don't get cancelled for that. Now, on the 8th of April 1802, while sailing east, Flinders encountered the French corvette Geography, led by the explorer Nicholas Bowden, who was on a government-sponsored expedition also. Despite the ongoing conflict between their nations, the two explorers exchanged information about their discoveries. A bit of mutual respect between two people in the same field, but on different sides of the coin. In fact, Flinders named the site of their meeting Encounter Bay. As Flinders continued his journey along the coast, he explored Port Phillip, where the city of Melbourne would later be founded. Now, speaking of the founding of Melbourne, the founder of Melbourne was reported to be John Batman. That's right. His last name is Batman, and in fact, they originally called the city Batmania after John Batman. Of course, they changed it later on to Melbourne, but still, in Melbourne today you can find many roads. One of the main roads leading down to the river is Batman Avenue. You also have Batman Lane, and many streets throughout Melbourne suburbs called Batman Road, Batman Street. So, that's why. I think we should have called it Batmania. I think that's a much cooler name. I like Melbourne, but you can't argue with a name like that, surely. Now, unbeknownst to Flinders, when he had got to Melbourne, the area had already been surveyed by one John Murray on the HMS Lady Nelson just 11 weeks before he got there. Flinders climbed Arthur's Seat, which is the highest point in the Southern Bay area, describing the land as pleasant and in numerous areas fertile. On the 1st of May, after ascending the Yo-Yangs to the northwest of Port Phillip, Flinders left a scroll with the ship's name atop a small pile of stones at the summit. Due to dwindling supplies, Flinders made his way back to Sydney and reached his destination on the 9th of May 1802. Flinders dedicated a total of 12 weeks and 2 days in Sydney to replenish supplies and recruit additional crew members for the ongoing expedition to the northern coast of Australia. Now, Bungaree, an indigenous individual who had previously accompanied him on his coastline survey in 1799, joined the voyage, along with another local indigenous man named Nanbaree. Captain John Murray and his ship, the Lady Nelson, were designated to accompany the Investigator as a supply vessel for this expedition. On the 22nd of July, 1802, Flinders embarked on a voyage northward to survey the coastline that would later be named Queensland, and it still is. Now, the expedition quickly anchored at Sandy Cape, where, with Bungaree as an intermediary, they shared a meal of porpoise blubber with a group of Batjala people. In early August, Flinders arrived at a bay that he named Port Curtis, where local indigenous population resisted their landings by throwing rocks at them. Flinders ordered musket shots fired above their heads as warning shots to disperse them, and it seemed to have worked quite well. As they continued northward, the expedition faced increasing difficulties navigating the Great Barrier Reef, which Flinders referred to as barrier reefs in his 1814 book due to their obstruction of safe passage. The ship Lady Nelson, deemed unseaworthy, returned to Sydney with Captain Murray, his crew, and Nanbury. Flinders meanwhile navigated Investigator north past the Whitsunday Islands, reaching the Torres Strait. On October the 29th, they landed on Murray Island and traded iron for shell necklaces with the local population. Entering the Gulf of Carpentaria on the 4th of November, the expedition mapped the coastline up to Arnhem Land. At Blue Mud Bay, a conflict with Aboriginal men during timber collection resulted in one crew member being wounded by spears, and in retaliation, 2 Aboriginal men being shot dead. Flinders captured a 14-year-old boy named Wagga at Caledon Bay, hoping to exchange him for a stolen axe. Although the axe was not returned, Flinders released the boy after holding him captive for a day anyway. Now, on the 17th of February 1803, near Cape Wilberforce, the expedition encountered a fleet of Marquesan trepagangers led by Pobasso, whom Flinders obtained valuable local information. During this part of the journey, significant decay was found in the Investigator, prompting Flinders to abandon further detailed exploration and focus on completing the circumnavigation. Thus, he sailed back to Sydney via Timor, along Australia's western and southern coasts. Along the way, he discarded 2 wrought iron anchors, which were later discovered, by the way, by divers in 1973 at Middle Island. These anchors are now displayed at the South Australian Maritime Museum in Port Adelaide and the National Museum of Australia in Canberra. The Adelaide Museum is better, I think. Now, upon returning to Sydney on the 9th of June 1803, the Investigator was declared unfit for further sea travel. It had deteriorated to a state beyond repair. At least the game was not worth the candle. Costs were too much. But this was a problem, because now Flinders was lacking a suitable vessel for further exploration. Thus he attempted to return to Britain as a passenger aboard the HMS Porpoise. However, they didn't get too far. The ship wrecked on the wreck reefs within the Great Barrier Reef, 700 miles north of Sydney. Flinders, however, skillfully navigated the ship's cutter back to Sydney, arranged the rescue of the stranded crew, and then took command of the 29-ton schooner HMS Cumberland to continue his journey back to England. Well, unfortunately, the deteriorated condition of Cumberland forced him to stop at the French-controlled Isle of France, which is now called Mauritius, by the way, on the 17th of December 1803 for repairs, just 3 months after the death of the French explorer Nicholas Bowden at the same location. Rest in peace to Mr. Bowden. Flinders was optimistic that despite the war with France that had started the previous May, he would be able to proceed with his journey. He believed that his French passport, even if it was granted for the ship Investigator and not the Cumberland, along with his scientific purpose of his voyage, would enable him to continue. Despite being aware of Bowden's previous encounter with Matthew Flinders, the French governor of Mauritius, Charles Matthew Isidore Dequian, decided to detain Flinders upon his arrival. Of course, relations between the two quickly soured, and Flinders was no doubt offended by this treatment. And also, Deccan felt humiliated when Flinders declined a dinner invitation with him and his wife. He also became suspicious of Flinders' scientific expedition, especially since there were no scientists aboard the Cumberland. Certainly sets off a few red flags, doesn't it? Well, upon a thorough inspection of the vessel, Deccan discovered a trunk containing various documents, including unauthorized dispatches from Governor Philip Gidley King of New South Wales. Among these papers were requests for additional British troops to defend against a potential French invasion of Port Jackson. He confiscated the logs of the investigator, returning only the first 2 volumes to Flinders, which are now held by the State Library of New South Wales, while the 3rd volume resides in the National Archives in the United Kingdom. Now, back to Deccan, who referred the matter to the French government, but due to the chaos of war and the long journey, a decision on the matter was delayed until further notice. Although Napoleon eventually approved Flinders' release on the 11th of March 1806, Deccan continued to hold him, fearing that Flinders' knowledge of the island's defences would prompt Britain to attempt its capture. It wasn't until June of 1810, after the Royal Navy began blockading the island, that Flinders was finally granted parole. While en route to England aboard the ship Olympia, Flinders was promoted to the rank of post captain. Now, during his term of imprisonment with the French, Flinders was initially restricted, but later allowed more freedom to explore the island and retrieve his documents. In November 1804, he sent the first cartographic representation of the continent he had surveyed, titled Australia or Terra Australis, to England. This map is significant, as it marked the first recorded instance of Flinders using the name Australia instead of the usual term of New Holland, the term previously used by James Cook, by the way, derived from the Dutch version, coined by Abel Tasman in 1644. Now, Flinders' map, however, still referred to the western portion of the continent as New Holland. The first comprehensive map of Australia, the Freycinet map of 1811, was also delayed due to the prolonged captivity of Baudin's expedition members. Well, finally, in October of 1810, Flinders had the chance to return to England. Very homesick, no doubt, by this point. Well, despite his deteriorating health, he immediately got to work on his book, A Voyage to Terra Australis, which, alongside his maps, was published in July of 1814. The book, which provided a detailed account of his expeditions between 1801 and 1803, included descriptions of his shipwreck on the Porpoise and his detention on Mauritius, along with his explorations aboard the Investigator, Porpoise, and Cumberland. The Mitchell Library in Sydney holds the original editions of the Atlas to Flinders' Voyage to Terra Australis, which includes 16 maps, 4 plates of views, and 10 plates of Australian flora. In 1964, the book was republished in 3 volumes, accompanied by a reprint of the portfolio. Flinders' map of Terra Australis, later known as Australia, was first released in January 1814, preceding the publication of his atlas and book. Matthew Flinders passed away at the age of 40 years old in the year 1814, the 19th of July, reportedly due to kidney disease. Now 40's pretty young, so that's not good. Well, at least he got to die back at home soil. In fact, quite peacefully at his home in London, located at 14 London Street, which is now Maple Street, and it's actually where the BT's tower stands today, that is British Telecoms. But tragically, Flinders died the day after the publication of his book and atlas, A Voyage to Terra Australis. Now, although he was asleep and never saw the completed work, his wife placed the volumes on his bed so he could at least touch them. Flinders was buried on July 23rd in the cemetery of St. James Church, Piccadilly, near Hampstead Road in Camden. Now, by 1852, his grave's exact location was lost due to changes in the cemetery, which was later transformed into St. James's Gardens, and part of the gardens was built over during the expansion of the Euston railway station, leading to speculation that Flinders' grave may be under one of the platforms. But don't worry, we'll get there in a moment. Now, in January 2019, archaeologists uncovered Flinders' burial during an excavation for the high-speed rail project. His coffin was identified by a well-preserved lead plate. A documentary about this discovery aired in September 2020, and plans were made to reinter his remains after examination by osteoarchaeologists. Osteo being bones, by the way. Now, following the discovery, there was a significant increase in visitors to Flinders' birthplace in Donington, Lincolnshire. Advocacy from the Matthew Flinders Bring Him Home group, the Britain-Australia Society, and his descendants led to his remains being reburied at the Church of St. Mary and the Holy Rood in Donington, where he was baptized. On October the 17th, 2019, the High Speed Rail 2 company announced this decision, and the Diocese of Lincoln approved the reburial, which took place on the 13th of July, 2024. That's right, only a few months ago. It was kind of a big deal, in Australia at least. I don't know how much news coverage it got in the United Kingdom, and I'm guessing it got absolutely zero coverage in the United States. But in Australia it was front-page news. Of course. He's one of ours. Now, the casket used for the reinterment was an exact replica of the original, crafted by one of the archaeologists who excavated his grave, and he did a damn good job of it too. The church now displays a newly discovered portrait, which is possibly of Flinders in his later years, attributed to William Westall from the Investigator expedition. And with that, we reach the end of our life of Matthew Flinders. I enjoyed it. Well, I suppose I enjoyed more so to just add my little anecdotes about Australia in general. Unbelievable, the Batman one, right? Well, it's normal for us, I suppose. Now I will thank my top-tier supporters, that is, Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Star Factory, and Wendy. And thank you, dear listeners, for getting this far. We had fun, didn't we? As always, I'll say a fond good night to you all, and I hope to see you again. Take a good rest. Lots of love. Good night.